Hello again. This is Lonnie Milbus, and this is another episode of Effing the Ineffable. Today, I'd like to talk about what I'm referring to as a hypnotic illusion. So, a lot of it is going to have to do with the true will and the inability to know true will or to truly do your true will when we are constantly pushed about and thrown about through this life by habits that many of which are unconscious, that are not created by acts of our will, but by the symptoms or manifestations of our environment. So, for instance, imagine you grow up being told that a particular neighbor is dangerous, someone who lives on your street, or a particular race of people is dangerous, which unfortunately happens quite often in modern society. Well, you're going to have, first off, when we're young, we're naive, of course. We have far less reason to believe that the people who are guiding us are lying to us. So when we hear these things, we internalize them. And we make habits of making judgments about particular people that we've heard things about. So that's one way that these habits are formed. Other ways, just in my experience, is I can sit around looking at my smartphone for hours, and when I do this, I develop routines on the smartphones, things I check, things I do in a sequential order, and it consumes time, whether these things are useful or not. And so I'm going to talk about ways of removing these, of opposing these. And it's my belief that in order to truly know and perform our true will, we have to oppose every force, every attraction, every attachment that locks us behind the bars of the prison of habit. And we have to build our own habits that we will, habits that we design. And that is the key, I think, to living out this life of thelema, of true will, of yoga, of any spiritual path. So, for an example, I'd like to talk about a musician, or primarily composer, but also improvisational musicians. But music that is composed by an individual is going to have a particular style. It's going to be made up of the modes that attract that particular musician, the one that they practice the most. If they practice a particular mode all the time because they like the sound or the feel of it, that's going to be reflected in their music. And hypnotism works in a similar manner. Hypnotism comes about by repetition, some kind of repetition. There's the classic example of the hypnotist with the pendulum swinging back and forth, or telling you to focus on a particular thing, and you receive messages subliminally. So with the racial thing, as you gather perceptions, you will naturally. So you grew up and someone said this particular sect of people is bad. As you grow up, you'll naturally take notice of all things that reinforce that. So you're further reinforcing what you've heard about the race. Or if you're a musician, you're constantly playing that particular mode, and you're just building that into your musical language deeper and deeper. And with the people, you'll look at those people and you'll see bad things they do, such as on the news, and you're affirmed. Oh, well, I'm correct. My opinion's correct about that. The thing that we forget is that we often ignore all of the facts and all of the events that would refute what we believe to be true. So you would not see that sect of people doing the good deeds that they do quietly throughout the day. You wouldn't be looking for that, so it wouldn't be as prominent in your perception. And it happens much more than most people seem to realize. Now with the musicians, it's not just music that's this way, it's art, all art. Whatever you gravitate toward, whatever the artist is attracted to and trying to emulate, they write with or create with these primary idiosyncrasies. So they become a habitual mode of expression. Even perception, they begin to see the world in the same way that their art is perceived and stylized by their individual consciousness. It's difficult for us to perceive beyond what we know is possible. This is a classic quote by Robert Anton Wilson, if I can get it correctly. We're far better at seeing what we believe than we are at believing what we see. And that's true. Our perception is molded and shaped by our minds. And this is kind of the art of the hypnosis that's gripped our society, that's gripped us, and in large part what's kept us from being able to expand our perceptions in a manner that understands things that aren't related directly to the five senses and the common interpretations of what those senses receive. This is everywhere in human culture. Western culture is mostly all I can speak for, but look at the Gregorian calendar. The calendar has 365 days. Every once in a while you have a leap year, which resets it so that it stays consistent with actual time. And time, it's presented as a wheel, as cyclical, whereas that's not really the case. That we revolve on our planet around the sun, creating those days. But if time, which is generally illusory and arbitrary anyhow, is to be perceived correctly, it's linear. You don't go back. You don't relive that day again. Yet our calendar's set up to appear that we do. We have holidays that reinforce that at a particular season. Right now it's October and Halloween is coming, and everyone has the Halloween symbols that they're putting up, and they're doing Halloween things. They're drinking the pumpkin spice, whatever they drink, and they're doing all of the things you do at this time of year, basically conditioning themselves to fall in line with these limited perceptions, with these four walls that are being put around people to contain us. I'm not saying it's intentional. I'm not saying it's some conspiracy that's done that, and perhaps it's a way that we make ourselves feel comfortable, but it's not the truth. And we're reinforcing our idea that it is the truth the longer we play into it without consciously seeking to discriminate or to discern what is our will and what is not our will. We work by an unchanging work schedule. Many people work most of their lives the same times of day, the same days of the week, with the same days off and the same vacation time scheduled, and without any change or any variety, totally denying the chaotic nature of the universe, the change in temporal truth about everything that in the material world. Everything is temporal. Everything's temporary. Television and the propaganda machine. Think about all of the people that have grown up. Television, when it first came out, was presented to people who were used to interacting with one another, solely with one another. It was their only human interaction was real. It was tangible. It was spontaneous. It was organic. And we presented television to these people, and it was wonderful because they could check that with what they had experienced with other people in the real world, and They probably saw it a lot more as theater than we do now. Generations pass, and it is now flipped to the point that television has become the reality, the standard by which we're expected to live. The people who write these television shows are determining how human culture will behave. And then you have the advertisers who are driving that. So it's gotten even that level, that one more level removed from the reality. And the simulacrum is it's deep. It's embedded. It's multi-layered away from an actual reality. And this is what we're living by at this point in Western culture. So it's emphasizing the material, the material desires, the material mode of existence is exalted in this sense. The spiritual is almost completely left out. This is why I've always been so enthralled with anything that has a spiritual message or theme, at least underlying it, because it's getting rarer and rarer throughout the decades. So it's just this inundation on all of our minds with material, this, material. Get more, buy in, you're just a piece of this material. And it's an exile of the spiritual. There's an emphasis on the obvious senses, this placing all burden of proof upon things that can be sensed, where actual facts are now flipping, where there's a segment of society growing that doesn't believe that facts are facts because it's not of their senses. Well, I didn't see this happen, therefore it didn't happen. It's disconnected, very disconnected. And this is the hypnotic nature of what's going on with an alienation from the true will of the individual and the individual's higher self specifically. And if you think about this in terms of biology and the way the brain works, is that's exactly how synaptic pathways are built. Something that you do repetitively over and over again. In a sense, this might be a little off of the physical reality, but the way I envision synaptic pathways and the way that I learned about them is that it grows wider. The channel grows bigger so that more information, more impulse can be passed through that channel. So the larger synaptic pathways are the ones that dominate the personality. And these habits, these things, the things you do the most are the things that tend to define you and lead to a predictability of what you will do in a given situation. Now, if you're not building these, someone else is, or something else is. And generally, in our culture, it's the quest for money, for domination of someone else that's building your synaptic pathways. So you're becoming subservient to this system that makes people rich, essentially. And I'm not saying that they're doing this intentionally. It's just when you're conniving and you're trying to get all the money you can, and you have millions and millions of people doing this, and everyone really only connects through a television, through actors doing things they're told to do, that gets pretty disconnected. There's not a whole lot of real true will in that. It's robot behavior. Essentially, you're receiving a program. So one way to get away from this is to break down the things that we do without thinking. To take things like as simple as brushing our teeth. One of the first exercises I did with this is I decided I wasn't going to brush my teeth with my right hand for a while. I'm right-handed, and so I had always brushed my teeth with my right hand. I decided, wait a minute, I want to break up this automatic response, this automatic action. I want to start brushing my teeth with my left hand. And it was horribly uncoordinated, very difficult to do, but it had an effect that was beyond the toothbrushing. It started me thinking about other things. Oh, wow. It made it easier to recognize things that I do habitually and don't even notice that I do. And I think that helped me seek a variety in material experience, which I think is important. So once you start doing things like that, you can travel by a different path every day. If you drive to work the same way every day and it's terrible and monotonous and you hate the drive and all you can do is fight off the stress, that's a good reason to drive a different path to work every day, or at least set up, a 3-day cycle of I'm not going to do the same thing every day. I'm going to explore. I'm going to do different things. And in this way, in every way that you possibly can in your life, I cannot recommend enough to insist upon change within the material world and your interaction with it, and a repetition of this denial of your habits, so that you're removing the unconscious habits and replacing them with conscious habits. And this is how we get to where we can transcend the mundane nature of the material program. And if you're like me and you're into a spiritual existence and you've contacted a spiritual source or energy or love that has to do with the infinite, the random, the chaotic, maybe not so much chaotic, maybe it is order, just the infinite, something bigger than what we're living now, then maybe you want to start putting the habits in that reinforce that, and working on building those slowly over time with one action after another action after another action into that being your mode of life, as opposed to what is programmed and expected. The material must always change. This is the weird dichotomy of this. The material is the thing that changes. It's and this is where me saying that spiritual infinite being random may appear random to us, but the truth is it's not. The material is what has to change. Anything made of material dies, as far as we know. It goes through seasons, it goes through phases, it ages and all of that. The infinite never changes. If it's truly infinite, how could it change? There's no possible place to go. There's no other way to be if there's the infinite. So that is made of that's nature is infinite never changes, as it's already always every possibility at once. So we have this backward. We tend to think that this material life, and I say we, and I'm sure it's not everyone at all times, but our society by and large tends to think that the material is the concrete. The material is the reality. When death is our absolute proof that is not the case. Nothing in the material world is permanent. So again, we have some work to do. And this hypnotism, this reversal, this is the rut that keeps us from realizing the truth of our being. And it happens through these habits. It happens through our thoughts that are built upon these habits, our expectations that are built upon these habits, our emotion that's built on top of that. And a lot of that can be reconciled and can be noticed with language. Language is like a computer, the computer code. Like it's the code that drives the computer, that moves beneath the machine to make it do its thing. And our life in large part is the computer itself. It's the function. So with language, a lot of what we say, if we think in a narrative, is going to define these habits. And where are we getting this language? We're getting it from outside. We're getting it from things other than ourselves, and it becomes the dominant force of our perception and our action. So there's Korzybski, as I learned through Robert Anton Wilson at first, and then I read Science and Sanity. It has a beautiful solution, and he believed that a lot of the problem is based on our use of the verb and all forms of the verb to be, such as words like is and are and things that affirm this is this, that there's not a perception of it, that's a reality. And that's one place we can start, is, picking up just little periods in the day that we can start, hey, I'm going to practice my E prime. You practice E prime for a set period of the day in a comfortable environment where it's not going to, make you too distracted from what you need to do, and just slowly through these little sessions, if they increase and actually become the way you use language, you can grow that into a habit of seems. There seems to be a perception of a painting on the wall, instead of there is a painting on the wall. And this is one way we can deprogram and reprogram ourselves. The Bhagavad Gita talks about this, in that the devotion to God or Krishna and abiding in spirit, the inflaming oneself in prayer of the thelemic philosophy, those things all imply and are elaborated upon greatly in those texts as those becoming conscious habit. And so the scriptures that I appreciate and that I have gotten a lot out of on my spiritual path, they enforce that is the way, instead of, going about my day not thinking and not just seeking after the sense desires, the immediate desire to response to acquisition, the immediate gratification, that kind of thing. It asks you to remove that. That's what losing attachments is all about. Not getting what you want immediately. You think about why do I want this? What is this impulse that is making me want this? Such as the phone idea. That's when I'm feeling that desire to pick up my phone. At times, if it's strong enough and I don't feel happy about it, I don't feel like it's the best thing, or I've blown off a meditation or something else, I will, at that moment, no, I'm going to plug my phone in, I'm going to put on my shoes, and I'm going to go for a walk without it. And I do that. And that's another example of what one can do to break these habits. Just deny them. I learned that with quitting smoking. It was something that I'd found on a website that said, when you have a cigarette craving, it really only lasts, I think, I'll just make up that I think it was like 18 seconds or something like that. That's how long a nicotine craving lasts, a physical withdrawal. And if you can get past that 18 seconds, knowing that, it's over. It's gone. But the psychology of it, the habit of it, is where the battle really lies. So you have to kind of remove those synaptic pathways and cut new ones that, okay, well, I understand this is a mental process happening to me. Right there, you've gotten into E prime, because there seems to be a need for a cigarette. There seems to be a strong desire to look at my phone. There seems to be a reason that I want to speak this way to this person, even though I don't feel right about it, or, There seems to be a need to say this particular thing because it's what it is expected of me. If you can break free of all of those things, and find what the truth of you is, and become silent, and decide in that silence, an answer typically will come. No, you don't want a cigarette now. You know what you could do? You could go outside and take, as many breaths as you want. Go do some pranayama breathing exercises out in the sun, and find out if that's better than a cigarette, things like that. It's a constant examination, and that's what it means to become the meta-programmer, is to be constantly observing the machinations of the mind, the habits that force the machinations of the mind, and to consciously change those, to move the pieces around. One, they call this, if it's a devotion to God, if you work like I do, and you use those models, and to you, the thing that you're after is God. One way of doing all of this is karma yoga. So you do things, and say you're doing a task that you can't necessarily decide whether it's of will or not, but it's come about and it's presented itself to you in your life, and you feel you need to get this done. You can go the karma yoga path, which is offering all actions consciously to God. You can say, hey, I'm doing this particular exercise right now to please God, and any result from it is not important. Anything I would possibly receive from it, I offer. I'm just doing this as duty, as a service to God, for His pleasure or her pleasure, or however you want to do that. But that's one way to start also breaking up the habit and realizing that the things aren't purely material. And building that habit through persistent devotion to something higher than the material, higher than the habit, higher than the expectations of society. And kind of within, if you're a student or aspirant of AA, there's another way you can do that, and that each exercise you do within AA, you offer each exercise. I mean, that's just a realization, because if you're doing AA in the mystical system, scientific illuminism, it is the purpose of all of your work to attain God realization in AA. I mean, that's what the system's for, essentially, or to liberate you from the mundane and attain the higher, the highest ideal. So each time you sit down to do, or stand up to do, a lesser ritual of the pentagram, each time you sit down to do one of your meditations, each time you build something or draw something or write something, that you can consciously realize and offer that to God, or whatever is your highest ideal, your holy guardian angel, whatever, right there before you begin. And if you start aligning that purpose with everything that you do, it gives you a discernment with which you can pick apart these little habits and start meta-programming yourself to a higher, better, and more fulfilling reality. And we must reprogram our mental and mundane habits into spiritual ones if we're going to transcend this hypnosis that's keeping us from our true will and from attaining our highest potentials. So just something to think about. Wanted to talk about that, as I've had some discussions with some folks over similar points, and noticing some particular things within our world today that relate to this. And I do believe that the hypnotic illusion is the very thing that keeps us from knowing God, and knowing God aright as the center of our own being, abiding in us as we abide in God as well. These truths become truths. They become known and not believed, when we can do this for ourselves, when we can liberate ourselves to perceive what we will without the influence of an entire lifetime or many lifetimes of material conditioning. So I hope you have found something of value in this. I will probably bring this up again on several occasions. This is kind of the essence of a spiritual path within the material world, so it'll come up again, and I thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to speaking with you again soon. If you have any questions, feel free to join the Path of Return Facebook group. It's currently the best method for contact, and ask any questions you have there, or you can leave them in the comments on YouTube. And I hope you are well, and I hope you make great progress upon your path, the accomplishment of your true will, or whatever you seek. Goodbye.